So, believe me, I understand. I've been stationed at chemical school 2 times. Once as a small group leader back in the mid-90s, as you see in the bio, and then 2 years before last, I was here as material branch chief. So I do understand, and I'm going to take this out and walk around a little bit. I hope you don't mind. You know, as I was thinking about what I wanted to say, I actually wrote about a 5-page speech. And you don't believe me, I've got it right here. But I think I'm going to dispense with my speech, because I attended the AAR for this class yesterday. And as I thought about that, and listened to the comments that a lot of students made, and I watched and listened to the interaction between the instructors and the students, and I saw the kind of concerns that they had regarding the class, things that would make it better, things that they thought was great as they went through it. What I thought about, I think the history of the Punic Wars is not a good place to start. So I'm going to dispense with the speech that I've written, and I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 things that I think are important. And I know, believe me, that you're tired of school. When I was sitting in your place back in Fort McClellan in 1987, I thought, man, I've been either continuously in school or pretty close to it for just about 18 years. I'm tired of school. And I think you probably are feeling somewhat the same way, that you're probably a little bit tired of school. And as a result of that, you're ready to go on and see what this Army career has in store for you. Well, as I thought about that, I thought, what can I say that you'll remember? Probably nothing. But I'm going to give it a shot, and I'm going to say, because as I thought about that, I thought, back when I was sitting there, who was my guest speaker? I had no idea who it was. Today I can't remember who it was, nor do I remember much of what he said. But having said that, I think there's 3 things I want to relay to you. As young officers, the kind of things that I think are worthwhile to think about, and what I'm going to share with you is nothing new. It's probably just going to be a reiteration of what Colonel Duncan and what Sergeant Major Lopez and what Sergeant Major Owens and what Colonel Wilcox and Colonel Van Camp and Colonel Visser, and before him General Smith, have all told you since you've been here. But hopefully hearing it from me, it's stuff that this is kind of timeless things. As young officers, I think there's 3 things that I would call imperatives of competence that are important. The first of these is your technical competence, the imperative of technical competence. You talked about that a lot yesterday at your AAR, the importance of and the blocks of instruction that you had, which are all very technically focused. When I was a lieutenant, I remember that at that time, chemical branch was one of the more technically oriented branches that we had, along with probably signal and perhaps military intelligence. Chemical branches, even in today, is much more technically oriented. As I said, I was the branch chief of material development for 2 years prior to going to the War College last year, and I was amazed at the level of sophistication that the equipment that we're fielding today has compared to what we had in 1987 when I was a lieutenant. Because not only now are we looking for things that will detect and sense chemical warfare grade materials, we're talking about toxic industrial chemicals, we're talking about toxic industrial materials, we're talking about hazardous materials in general. I'm telling you, 20 years ago, we didn't know what hazmat was. We never even considered the concept. We didn't consider what level A was. So you guys have experienced all of these things, but having as a background, as a foundation for a very technically oriented branch, you need to understand that where you're going to work for commanders that have no idea what you know. They don't know what you know, they don't know how much you know, but they will trust you to know what you're supposed to know, and they'll trust you to be candid with them, and they'll trust you to be able to tell them if you don't know. Because believe me, after working in an infantry battalion for 2 years as a lieutenant, and working in an infantry brigade for 2 years as a captain, I could have told those colonels just about anything. They would have believed me because they didn't know. Of course, that's back in the days when we didn't talk about CBRN, we talked about NBC, and NBC in those days in light divisions, of course, stood for nobody cares. So it was a little bit different environment then. It's a very different environment now, because now they care, and they really care that you know what you're doing. So what I'm saying is, don't be afraid to be candid with your bosses, but at the same time understand that they don't know what you know. So the technical foundation that you have, and I saw a couple of comments yesterday that talked about perhaps some standalone training, how does this really apply to what I'm going to be doing? You need to understand that what they taught you at this school is the technical skills that you need to know, but they can't teach you everything in terms of how what you learn today, or in this course, applies to what you're going to know or need to know when you get to the unit you're going to, because every unit is a little bit different. They weren't lying when they told you that. But that leads me to, well, I guess by way of illustration, let me just tell you one quick story about this. My first duty assignment was in Hawaii, and at that time we actually still had a lot of smoke units in the Army. And I was, we had a chemical company in Hawaii that was a dual purpose company. They did smoke and they did decon. Well, being in the infantry battalion, we're going to do movement to contact at night. The infantry soldiers will be walking along the ridge, and the bad guys probably were down in one of the lower areas watching us leave the line of departure. So I suggested to my boss, this is a night movement, why don't we use smoke? Tom knows what I'm talking about, the kahukus where there's the valleys and the ridges. And my boss looked at me and he said, that is about the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody suggest. Smoke at night? What are we going to try to cover up? I said, no, listen, the smoke is going to be heavier than the air. It's going to go down to the lower areas. That's where the bad guys are probably going to be watching us walk by, and they don't have thermal sights down there. They might have that night vision goggles, but that's about it. So he said, I eventually convinced him. He said, okay, I'll give it a try since my guys won't be in the smoke. Guess what? The smoke did what I thought it was going to do, what I was praying it was going to do. And it went down into the lower areas and it absolutely blinded the opposing forces. They couldn't see us. They had no idea when we left. They had no idea when we walked by. They were able to attack the objective, and it was a complete surprise. And it was a success. From then on, I gained some credibility with the boss, and he listened to me then because I actually did something that worked in that regard. But that leads me to my next imperative, and that is the imperative of tactical competence. Now, I know you've had some MD&P training. I know you've had some, in your pre-commissioning sources, you did some tactics type training. It is critical as chemical officers and special staff officers that you understand the tactical mission of the units that you're going to support. If it's an infantry battalion, you've got to understand what those mission essential tasks are of the infantry battalion that you're supporting. And I'm not going to get way down in the weeds. You just got to know what their mission is. Okay, so how do you learn that? You learn that by figuring out what their mission essential tasks are, what their collective tasks are, and for you, importantly, what are the leader tasks? What are the tasks the leaders need to understand how to do? When you learn that, then you're going to learn, okay, now I know what their mission is, so probably I can figure out how a chemical company can support that mission. But beyond that, and I know I'm probably going to say something that, from what Zach tells me, you guys actually do stuff at BOLC and USR in this course. Well, in an infantry battalion, coming out of officer candidate school, I had no idea what an infantry battalion was composed of hardly. But after doing the USR for 26 months, I knew what an infantry battalion was composed of. I knew how many people it had, I knew what grade structure was, I knew what equipment they had, I knew if the equipment worked or not, and I also understood clearly how all the stuff that they had, their capabilities, fed into what their mission was. And that, again, enabled me to figure out, okay, well, how can a chemical company, how can any other combat multiplying type of unit support the unit that I'm a part of? So, being tactically proficient is very important. And once you prove that you're technically competent, once you prove that you're tactically competent, it's going to enable your boss to be able to trust you to do some things that are maybe outside your lane. When I was a lieutenant, we went to Australia. It's the first exercise in Australia since World War II. First time we'd ever worked with Australian forces since World War II. There was no CBRN, no chemical play in the exercise. So the boss looked at me and he said, there's no chemical play, but you know what our mission is. You know how we can be used. So you're going to go and live with the Australian Brigade and go to the Outback for the next month. So that's what I did. I went to live with the Australian Brigade in the Outback for the next month. And because my boss understood that I understood the tactics of how our unit would work, I was able to be, I hope, a value-added part of that Australian Brigade, telling them how they could use our infantry battalion, because they didn't really know.